Hello, teachers. You know that one of the challenging points that we all encounter in our everyday practices in teaching is designing questions that are effective to reflect and measure the right level and progress of our students when it comes to their assessment, whether that assessment is formative or summative. That's why today's session will be basically focused on the craft of designing questions, specifically effective questions for tests and quizzes in language assessment. Okay, so in today's session, I'll be focusing on the answer of two main questions. And the first question is, what are the criteria of building an effective test or quiz? And what is the relationship between question types and Bloom's taxonomy, or the cognitive levels of Bloom's taxonomy? The second question I'll be touching on is the scale of complexity. What a scale of complexity is recommended to be applied in tests and quizzes so that they're neither too easy nor too difficult. Okay, so in order to answer these two questions, I have to refer to Bloom's taxonomy, specifically the several levels of thinking demonstrated in the cognitive domain. And as you can see in that chart, the lower levels of thinking are displayed at the top of the page or the chart, and the higher levels are displayed at the bottom of the chart. And if you look carefully at the action verbs at each level of these 6 levels, you'll find that we have action verbs that work on or demonstrate the thinking skill that should be displayed or gauged at that particular level of thinking. And as you know that we make use of those action verbs when it comes to designing lesson objectives, because they show us the way to what our students are expected to achieve at the end of a lesson, right? And by the same token, those action verbs can be used in designing questions. Let's say in the quizzes that we use as a formative tool of assessment, or even in the tests that we use as a summative tool of assessment. And to show you an example, and while showing you that, I'd like you to have a close look at the action verbs. So, for example, if we design a question that requires the students to match pictures to words, or match words to definitions, or even to ask students to list the names of a specific category, like list the names of food, list the names of healthy foods or healthy drinks, or even to ask students to name the parts of the human body or the parts of a plant. All those types of questions fall within the realm of the lower level of thinking, which is the level of the knowledge, because all students need to do at that tier is to remember information. If they remember the information they studied, they will well respond and properly respond to these types of questions. So naming, labeling, listing, matching, all of these types of questions are very easy or simple questions, because they do not require the student to exert effort. I mean to exert mental effort to answer the question. Okay. Moving on. So these are two examples of questions that we frequently use in our quizzes, like labeling things, whether labeling body parts, labeling furniture pieces, labeling parts of a plant. So any labeling question, again, is a simple question. Another one is the matching, and this is an example. The same applies to true-false questions, because true-false questions target, simple logic. Again, what the student needs to respond to this question is just remember information. So the true-false question is an easy question. It does not require a sophisticated level of thinking. Moving on to that type of question, if I need, and I forgot to tell you something, that if my quiz includes only matching, labeling, listing, so the quiz or the test will not be reflective of the level of my students or how far they progressed. Okay, why? Because here the test or the quiz will be completely or highly easy and works on a very limited, level of thinking. But if I want to have a kind of faithful reflection of my students' progress, I may use another type of question, which is compare and contrast, like this one. So here the students not only require the skill of remembering and comprehension or comprehending information, but they need also to be able to analyze data and information to find out the differences and the similarities. So this is a higher level of thinking. So using a question like this, or using a type of question like this, so a question like this is more likely to show you how far your students can use the language. Okay, so moving on to another type of question that we may include in our tests or quizzes and works on a more sophisticated level of thinking, and again is highly likely to show you how far your students can use the language, not only at the level of remembering, but at higher levels of thinking. And this is what is needed to be reflected and displayed in real life, which is the purpose of all what we do in their education, which is write something, writing a text. Let's say writing a short story, writing a text which includes a plan for a trip or booking a flight, or writing or creating a pamphlet, creating a poster, creating a magazine page. So all of those types of questions require students to create and come up with a final product, which is the top level of thinking, the synthesization and creation. So here students need to use all levels of thinking. They need to remember the items of information to include in the text. They need to compare and contrast and select the most appropriate pieces of information, and they need to synthesize those information into appropriate sentences based on what they studied in class. And at the end, also, they need to design. If you ask them to create a poster or pamphlet, they need to design. So they work on creativity. So, which is the top of the pyramid or the taxonomy of Bloom. So making, a variety or a kaleidoscope of those types of questions will help you at the end to come up with a quiz or a test that provides you a faithful reflection of how your students progress at all levels. Okay, moving to another popular type of question that we frequently use, whether in quizzes or tests. And this type of question or questions is the MCQs or the multiple choice questions. So the question is, are those types of questions easy or difficult? So what do you think? So actually, MCQs can work at several levels of thinking, and they can range in difficulty and complexity, uh, or range on the difficulty and complexity spectrum. So they cover a wide range of tiers or levels. So except of course for the creation level, because in MCQs, all what you have to do is to choose. You don't have a chance to create anything. So there are some criteria that you need to consider when you design MCQs. So the first criterion is you need to keep the questions short. So you need to keep the questions in options short, and this is to avoid the reading load. So you don't increase or maximize the cognitive load of students while answering the questions. They don't spend much time reading and processing information. And the second criterion you need to consider is make grammar consistent with all options. So for example, when you say that the elephant is a and then space and then options, some of them start with a consonant and some of them start with a vowel. So this maximizes the chances of guessing, because the student will, limit the options to those options that fit the grammatical item, which is the a. So the solution to this problem is to move the grammatical item to the options rather than the question. Another criterion is the options are recommended to be displayed vertically rather than horizontally. And there is a good reason why this should happen. Again, because the vertical display of the options reduces visual load and saves the student's time. The final criterion to consider is to provide 3 to 4 options to reduce the chances of an answer based on guessing. Okay, so having answered the first question, which is the relationship between question types and Bloom's taxonomy and the criteria of designing effective questions. Now let's move on to the second question, which is how can we scale difficulty in a test or quiz? Or in other words, what is the rate of complexity and sophistication that should be applied in a test or quiz? How many easy questions should I include? How many moderate questions and how many difficult questions should I include in my quiz or test? So here is the answer. In a study published in 2020, it is highly recommended, or it's said that it's highly recommended that the rate of difficulty follow that rate, which is 253. In other words, that 30% of the questions should focus on knowledge, understanding, and remembering, or to be easy, while 50% of the questions should target application, a problem students solve, or that students apply a specific rule they studied, and 20% of the questions address the creation or evaluation levels. In other words, they have to be difficult. Okay, so following this rate is kind of eye-opening. It tells you, or it helps you in selection. Or using that rate along with the Bloom's taxonomy will help you select the types of questions on the one hand, and the number of the questions at each level of difficulty that you should include. So it's kind of a helper, a great help for teachers. So this is an example of the categorization question. And I forgot to tell you that questions like reorganize categorize or classify, these are higher order thinking questions or difficult questions, because higher questions that require students to use higher order thinking are by default difficult. So this is an example of categorized questions. Here we have vocabulary items, and then we have categories. So students need to work on a set of levels of thinking in order to respond to this question. They need first to identify and recognize the items, which is the level of remembering or knowledge. They need to compare and contrast between the elements. They need to categorize and classify those items into the appropriate categories. So actually, it's really of a great help to make that connection between the action verbs of Bloom's taxonomy and the question types to include in tests and quizzes. And I think that those will help you abundantly in your future quizzes and tests, and facilitate the process of creating and designing tests and quizzes. So throughout this session, I focused on telling you about the connection between Bloom's taxonomy and question types, the criteria of designing MCQs, and the scale of difficulty, the recommended rate of questions at the spectrum of complexity that you're recommended to follow. And finally, those are the references that I basically relied on while planning the session. I hope you've benefited, and thank you so much.